experience it where you look back, you start out young and you're working towards a certain degree and you accomplish your education and then you finally get a job and maybe you'll change, but then you start that job and you keep going along and then all of a sudden you wake up, you've got a family, you've got this job that you had been waiting for, and you're like, okay, what's next? I did all that for this? And so there's always kind of a little bit of a hollowness that's left inside us if that's what we're searching. Now remember, the first 6 chapters are also looking what I call horizontally in the world. We're not looking up. We're looking under the sun. We're looking on this physical world. And all of these things that he had been doing were in pursuit of things without God. And he has very clearly already stated that in the previous chapters that, basically if it's without God, then absolutely there's no value. It's not there. And the importance of having God a part of that will help to sustain that pleasure. That he wants you to have pleasure. He wants you to have pleasure in your work, pursuit after pleasures, everything. He wants you to enjoy the seasons. And that's another cycle, he said, is just kind of repetitive. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. The water goes from the mountains to the ocean, and it repeats. This cycle. And so, but without God, where's the true value? We looked at Dobson's book, talk about a quote that he had used in that, and the idea that, God has kind of put this vacuum in us that wants to fill it, and it needs to be filled. And if it's not filled while we're pursuing life, then it is vanity. It has no real depth of value. And you notice the other common theme that he has in all of those is that at the end of the story, we all die. And we go out from under the sun, right? So it's temporary. Everything we're going to experience. So it kind of fits with the gospel, where we don't look down, we look up. We look towards the crown of righteousness. And as we're striving towards that, serving God, then what do we have? We have a satisfaction. We have a satisfaction in our job and the pleasures we experience and all these things like this. So all of that was leading up to the idea that only with God we're going to have these satisfaction in these pursuits. Now he has shifted. Last lesson we looked at, that when he started out at the top, looking down, how lonely it could be, but then he started bringing up worship. We looked at worship and it seemed fragmented somehow, kind of like, well, wow, he just diverted off of all these quests that he's on. But that's kind of the hinge pin. It's kind of that pin that's going to turn the second part of this book into stop looking this direction and start looking up. And he kind of showed how that all of these things that we're doing are superficial, but don't make worship that way. And that's one of the problems we see with a lot of Christians, is that it's just as superficial and they're not being satisfied. And why? Because is God really a part of the central part of their worship? And if it's not, it's just like all those other pleasures that you've been searching after and trying to be satisfied in, and then you come to church and you're wanting to find satisfaction there, and you're not finding it. Why? Because you don't really have the Lord in it. You don't have your faith right. And so you're going to always come up short. You're never going to be satisfied in this journey. So that was like last week's lesson. Now, tonight we're going to start out, this is very unique. So it's kind of the Proverbs in Ecclesiastes lesson. These are some of the most famous verses that we're going to look at that you'll be very familiar with when we go to them. And we look at it, but let's talk a little bit about the Hebrew style of literature, just a little portion of it, because I don't like to dive too far off. But when we get to it, we'll be able to see some of the beauties of these, what I call kind of the better than sayings. There's 7 of these better than. This is better than. And this is one form of the poetic way that it's been written. So when we talk about it, it's the one aspect that you'll see with Hebrew literature is they use this style of contrasting or parallelism. There's 3 parts to parallelism, and the first one is when you contrast things. Black, white, up, down, forward, backwards. Things that are just opposite. And so we're going to use a couple of the Proverbs because these are ones we can really see. But I want, when we get into the Ecclesiastes verses, we'll be able to see how they do kind of step out and we can see them. In Proverbs 13:1, we see where, a wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. So, you have a wise son, you have one that's not. You have the opposites. And so we have this is the style of Hebrew parallelism, contrasting concepts. You have complementive, one that stacks. In other words, if it's this bad, it's even worse. It kind of tenses up, builds up the original thought that it's trying to say. Proverbs 14:13, we see there, even in laughter, the heart may be in pain, and the end of joy may be grief. So we're talking about pain. He's describing it in two different ways, these are really powerful ways of teaching. We do it all the time. We do it in a lot of ways, in just casual conversations. When you're trying to teach somebody something or explain a concept, many times we'll use this type of parallelism to teach. One more common we're probably more familiar with is when we talk about parables, right? You say, where's the parables in the Old Testament? Well, there are no parables. They're only in the New Testament. No, they are. These are, in a form, parables. We've just taken the teachings that Jesus was using and we label them really stern. These are parables that he teaches. And a lot of the way he taught was taking some concept that we may not be able to comprehend, something spiritual. And he would lay something beside it that you go, oh, planting seeds. I get that. An unfaithful son. Oh, but he taught you a spiritual thing, and then he would say, now that's what it's like. It's like this son who came and demanded everything. It's like a farmer who went out and had seeds. And so, but those were very specifically pointing towards teaching about the kingdom, the king, the son, and the citizens in this kingdom. So we have a nice, neat little teaching that style. And it's very Hebrewic again. But in the Proverbs, the Psalms, as well as here in Ecclesiastes, we see this type. So the first one was, kind of the opposite, abstract. And then we have one that complements, that we have even the heart in laughter can be in pain. And that's kind of, I almost didn't want to dig too deep in it because some of these, I had to question myself. I said, that's a cool one. Do people know what that means? Somebody could be laughing on the outside, but crying on the inside. And at the end of joy, there may be grief. If you think about it, somebody's laughing, and then they stop, and they're back in their reality and going, my mama just died. And, you may be at work, and your mom died 3 days ago, but your heart's broke, and you're hurting. And so this is that type of these things. It's helping to really bring out the lesson of this thing. Comparative. It draws out a comparison between two things. And so in Proverbs 25:24, it's better to live in a corner of a roof than in a house shared by a contentious woman. This one's always been kind of one that, sometimes people say, man, what's it talking about? Anybody got any idea? Anybody dare to touch that one? Yeah, you're laughing, huh? I used to say it kind of, sarcastically, boy, it's better to live in a corner on a roof than in a shared house with a contentious woman. If we'll calm down and get some of it out, basically, if you think about it, to live into the corner of a room of a house is not a very comfortable place to be. You're living in just a little bit of maybe the whole beautiful house. And why? Because you're fighting with your wife. You're having, this chaos in your family. So, it's better to live in that than to sit there and fight. So if you have to suffer, in other words, you want harmonious relationship. And that's kind of the sacrifice, maybe to live in that. To compromise, is to get something along better. So in chapter 7, coming back over to Ecclesiastes 1-5, we have these three things that he uses as devices to help reinforce the concepts. Comparing, contrasting, and then something that's complementary. And the first one, and these are the ones that kind of go through, I guess you kind of call those the better than sayings. And again, we've heard of them. The value of a good name. In 7, verse 1, the first part. A good name is better than good ointment. So, again, we hear that, but what does that mean? Now, real quick, we can understand if I was to sit and describe, I'm getting older, and so some of my illustrations are getting outdated. I got to come up with some modern names and historical things. But if somebody was to say that my name is Charlie Manson, my dad was Charlie Manson. Most people go, we know who your dad is. Charles Manson, do you know who he is? I mean, if you said my dad was Charles Manson, and he does have some kids, by the way, they wouldn't claim his body. And one of them changed his name. His dad did not have a good name. So, but what is it about a name? So what? It's not a goofy name. Manson isn't a goofy name. That's kind of a strong Manson, It represents the character, doesn't it?
Yes, it's tied to the person, though.
It is. So now, we understand that it's not just a name, like the poor guy that they named the John after. You know what that is, a John? Mm-hmm. It's a bathroom, the toilet. They named that after him. Now, can you imagine the rest of your life? Your name, everybody's bringing it up. I got to go to the John. So, but that's, so we understand the value of that. But so a name is really the essence of the person's character and the quality of that person's life as reflected through your name. My last name is different from my grandfather on my mother's side. And he was a Christian. And it was interesting that when I would, start going to church, well, in high school here, and come to church, I was Ronnie Herring. I wasn't Ronnie West. If I said West, then people go, oh. But when they found out, I would say, well, my grandpa is Earl West. And then it's like you'd almost see a whole other change, like, oh, Earl. We know Earl. And it was in a good way. It wasn't like a Charles Manson way. But the same type of thing. And I saw that, I felt that right away growing up, was the great value in his name was his character, who he was. Because then I would start to hear all these things about him that I didn't know as a little kid. So we understand it. So now we come to what is it? What's he comparing it to? Ointment. Now, I don't use ointment, and every ointment I've ever used is stinky muscle ointment stuff. So I get it. But we're not talking about modern day ointments. What would it be? We're talking about very valuable, but also very fragrant, very pleasant when you smell it. And so that value, we're talking like cologne nowadays. I cannot believe the cost of cologne, $100 a bottle. I'm like, no, I'll stick to Old Spice. No, I'm not. But it's almost like that. He's trying to bring something that they would understand in their culture was extremely precious and valuable that not everybody could have. And that would be something that would be ointment. And he says, that name. And so what is that telling you? What do you think it's teaching you then and me about our name? We get it, don't we? We get it that, if your name comes up, you don't want it to be a byline. You don't want it to be something that's horrible. So it's about my character again. So it's bringing up again and helping to show the value there. Some of these are really bizarre to people, like death is better than birth. Survey says. How many would say agree with that in the world, at least? No, most people in the world would not. And the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. So why? Why was that? And even for Christians, it's kind of like, well, birth started my life, and I'm enjoying my life. I'm in life right now. Death, it's over. It's done. Anything I've been able to enjoy in my relationships and all things that I have been aware of, that I am comfortable with, stops. So
maybe if you've lived a good life, that's the only way I can, maybe that might be the case.
There's more than one way. Like living a good life, a lot of people, you see like the suffering of the world. and enduring what you go through during your life, a lot of times, it's better to leave. Your death is better. And then there's some non-religious kind of thoughts too, that people that are without a God, that are suffering and dying of painful ailments and such, that they get to a point where they want to end it, right? They want to end it. But for Christians, it is a joyful victory in the fact that we have accomplished it. We've overcome. And we know the older you get, you're going to start to realize quickly, I'm ready to go. It's not getting better. And we had a man who was dying, and we baptized him. We couldn't get him to accept the Lord and become a Christian until like a week before he died. And after we baptized, literally, we had to lift him in a wheelchair onto a chair all the way up there. We baptized him, and I remember looking at him afterward. I said, "Why did you wait so long?" And he said, "Because I knew I would screw it up. And so I wanted to wait until I knew I was going to," and he died that week, like 3 days later. I said, I quickly had a little conversation with him about that's not what it's about. And I said, that was pretty dangerous, But isn't that kind of in a way? I mean, we fight the good fight, like Paul said, and we're stumbling because we are still sinners until we die.
That's right.
And so there is that threat to our relationship. And so there is a part where there is a betterness. And not only that, but when you're born, it's the beginning. I look at kids in their 20s. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be starting over, man.
That's
no.
Right.
I look at my grandkids and I go, when I was 20, I would have said, yeah, that's cool. I'd like to go back to high school. But the further you get away and you look at it, you go, no, I don't have to start that all over again.
That's right.
So the day of your birth, you got that whole fight and struggle the rest of your life. You don't want to go back. So that's one of the things. The third one that's better than is funerals better than weddings. That's kind of challenging, isn't it? I mean, come on, really? Which one do you enjoy honestly going to more than the other? A wedding. I know you're probably that good student going, funeral. But honestly, if you really had a choice, we would probably be a lot more comfortable and more pleasant to go to a wedding. When I started preaching, and I was going through and we're learning about how to put together funerals and weddings and that stuff. The preacher I was studying with told me, he goes, "You're going to find out real quick." And we were teaching Proverbs. He just said this. He goes, "You're going to find out real quick as a preacher that you're going to really, you'd be a lot better off. You're going to enjoy doing funerals more than you're going to enjoy doing weddings." And I looked at him and I said, "You got to be kidding me," because it scared me to death, the thought of having to do a funeral, right? A wedding, at least everybody's happy, they're joyful. But after a few years, of funerals and weddings, I saw real fast exactly what the proverb writer's talking about. Who's really listening to the word of God at a funeral or a wedding? Well, I can tell you, based on watching the audience, nobody's really listening to the preacher until something silly happens and they giggle, but they're usually looking at the beautiful dress, or other things. And it's really a party environment. It's a joyful environment. But a funeral, man, I got eyes locked. Because everything about your existence starts to become very sensitive. And you become very in tune with your own mortality. And so it is interesting how that, and what does it do for you, though? I'm just talking about as a preacher, but, the ones I've gone where I haven't, been a part of, performing the service or anything. Every funeral you go to, you cannot help but stop and think about your own mortality. And a lot of times, not so much now because we're doing more cremations, but especially like when you have the person there in a casket, and you see that, guess what? I'm going to end up there. And so there's no more honest time than to go and maybe refresh ourselves in the sense of reminding ourselves of who we are. So the house to feasting, again, it kind of comes back, without God, it's just superficial and it's done. And who remembers the weddings? Who remembers those? But a lot of times people remember. I've had people come up to me years, I'm talking 15 years after I did a funeral. I remembered the person that I did the service for, and somebody would bring up something I said, remembered the verse I used during a funeral. And it just happened to me this summer in Louisiana in a really bizarre way. This young person, we're sitting there, and a friend of my daughter-in-law's, and I'd forgotten all about what I had said in that, and she brought it up, and she quoted it to me. And she told me, she goes, "You cannot believe how much that meant to my family, those verses and what you were reading and what you said." I've never had that at a wedding. Somebody comes, "Man, those vows we did, they were amazing." Wow, we still hold on to those things, right? So it's absolutely so true. So that's why in 7:2 he says it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man. And the life takes it to heart. And another one, these better thans are really the opposite of somebody who lives under the sun without God, aren't they? All of these, a Christian who has God in their lives, these make sense. But to somebody who's living under the sun in the world and has no God, no, these are backwards. The next one is sorrow's better than laughter. In 7, verse 3 and 4. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. Even when we're hurting, a lot of times God's working on us on the inside. It's not always something that's going to last. We understand that trials and things that we go through many times can produce something far greater than that moment of our sorrow. There's things that outwardly we may be sad about, kind of the reverse of what I was talking about. A lot of times we can sit and laugh at something, but down inside our heart's broke. But if you have God, you see, if we have God working on the inside and we have that a part of our lives, then this makes sense, because that's where our happiness is at. It's in the spiritual level. And so no matter what happens around us, and that's why you see Christians that are so powerful, and you look at what's going on in their lives and you wonder, what in the world do they have any reason to be happy?
That's right.
I saw that in my grandparents. I was just blown away. Listen to all the things they suffer through. Your parents, parents that, elderly, they passed on, and they were some of the best, most positive, uplifting people. And you listen to the history of all the things they've done, the death and destruction and all that they went through, the depression and suffering financially, and they are the most happy. And my grandpa told jokes even after he had a stroke and he had been burned, all that stuff. He had the most positive, uplifting attitude. And it did. It just, as a young teenager looking at that, I went, there's something wrong with him. What's, cutting fingers off and joking with the doctor. I'm like, that, why? Because in the heart. It's in the heart where the Lord, if somebody has that focus, can help. And what did that do to the people around him? Well, I know what that did, my grandpa's attitude and philosophy, how it impacted me, and the power of that as well. But the fool, what do? They want to drink it away. They want to indulge something to forget about it. The Lord doesn't make us forget. The Lord just helps us to have it into perspective. Yeah. And so this is another one of those. Better a rebuke than listening to foolishness. Now that's kind of, okay, yeah, I could get that. It makes sense. But you got to qualify, to me, you got to qualify what is foolish. A lot of the philosophies in this world, and some of even the scientific philosophies, they're foolish. It sounds smart. They've convinced a lot of people, haven't they, on a lot of things. Somehow even some scientists believe that there's more than two genders now, right? And there's people believe in it. You're listening to foolishness. I'd rather be, and I run across these people. It's like, you try to not rebuke them, but you try to stand up for the truth and give a gentle, loving correction even. And they won't take it. That's a part of the divisiveness that has occurred in our nation. But you know what? That junk filters into the church.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And it's so cancerous that we have to be on guard on it. Because if you can't take correction, we have to be able to take correction. So this is another better than. In verse 5, it is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. Partying, the festiveness as well. In verse 6, for as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. And this too is futility. So anybody understand the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot? How many have done that? See how sometimes they don't necessarily make sense to us? Well, if I was to say it this way, as for the crackling of a tumbleweed under a pot. Now, you're from Alabama. I don't know if you've seen many tumbleweeds around here. So even that one may not work for you. But to anyone out here that's ever seen a tumbleweed burn, it flashes and it is hot. And then what? It's gone. It's gone. So that's why, sometimes we got to slow down, like crackling of a thorn bush under a pot. What are your thorn bushes down in Louisiana or up in Montana or Alabama? I mean, and so that's why, you got to kind of look at it. So to us, it'd be something that would flash and burn bright and hot and give off that energy, but then it's quick and it's gone. Versus pecan wood, right? Pecan wood will burn and it'll continue, And so that's what he's saying. It's better, let it go. That's the foolishness that you see. Oppression makes a wise man mad, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So we talked about this earlier. Solomon was talking about it when it comes to looking around the world and seeing nothing but oppression and injustice. Everywhere you look, that's what you see. A world or a nation that is without God, it doesn't care necessarily about justice. It doesn't care about those who may be oppressed and stuff. So we're talking about a wise man, somebody who is wise in God. As he looks around, he sees that. And he's seeing the way that, even a bribe can cause the turning of a heart, cause somebody to turn around. So even the wise people can be ruined by the injustice and corruption. And so, we need to be able to guard our hearts. The end is better than the end is better than the beginning. Very similar, the same. Verse 8, the first part, the end of a matter is better than its beginning. The beginning is always exciting. You get excited. We're going to build a new house. That's exciting. You get out the blueprints, you plan for all this stuff. When you get done building that thing, it's even better, isn't it? Because you have a sense of accomplishment. And you can look back. The beginning, you're starting the journey, you're starting it out. So it kind of does fit with the early one we were talking about. A patient person, somebody that is patient is better than those that are proud. Again, some of these we say they're kind of common sense. They're taught also in the New Testament. We see that, in the second part of verse 8 through 10. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. So there's a couple of things, patience versus pride. A calm person that has a heart that's godly versus one that is proud and stubborn. We know those are always diabolically opposed to each other when it comes to the spiritual relationship with God. It's the proud who's going to kind of make themselves into their own self-competent person who's made everything, they've done it. You can't correct them. And those are the ones who will reject God. And so one who is patient. And this is, we've been going through the book of James on Sunday morning. And this is one of the aspects that we see there is that how fast, we're to listen, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And it's the same type of thing that we see a process that when we're talking and engaging with people, and maybe it's some conversation about politics that you don't quite get along with a person, or religious issues, or maybe different things at work. And this is where we're struggling, I think, as a nation again, because it doesn't seem like you can have your opinion and I can have mine. It's like, no, I can have mine and you can have mine. And we'll be fine as long as, I got my opinion and you have my opinion. Right? And and then otherwise, I've seen so many, I know a man, his wife divorced him because of who he voted for president. Not this very last one, but one recent. What? He goes, dude, I was just as shocked. I was like, and I had met her a couple of times, and she came across as one that was very proud, very self-reliant, that, wasn't willing to consider anything else. So this type of stubbornness, self-centeredness, versus one who is patient. And one who is patient as well is one that's going to be able to be less angered. Because guess what? They're listening. They're respecting the other person's opinion, whether they agree with it or not. Respect it. It's theirs. They believe in it. Just because you don't get along with them doesn't mean you have to raise your voice or get upset or debase their ideas or attack them in any way. Just say, okay. But listen. And then, you know what? You might actually find they have a little bit you could learn from them. And so this is the idea that, that anger, when somebody is impulsive and loses their anger, to me, it also shows their lack of self-control. People that I've known over my years that are explosive anger like that, they also lack self-control in a lot of other areas in their lives. The next part, he says, why is it that the former days are better than these? You know what I call that? Looking over your shoulder, living in the past, right? The old days are better than now. Are they really? I was talking to my grandson over Thanksgiving, and he asked me, he said, well, do you think that the technology that you grew up with, is better than the technology today? And I said, no. And he was shocked. I don't know what he thinks we had as far as technology. Right? But he just, for some reason, thought that I would have loved and enjoyed the past technology than what we have now. And so I explained to him, and he was just, it was fascinating. He's a very, very intelligent kid, so it was kind of interesting to watch. But how many people do we know like that? They live in the past. We talked about this as well in Ecclesiastes. What do we talk about? The grass is always greener where? Under your feet. This is that old story. Well, I remember back in the day, we walked up and we did all this, and you hear that and you go, man, those are glory days. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. And to me, if you think about it, it's a little insulting to God and yourself and what you've accomplished and you're ignoring the fact of what's God working in your life right now. Why are you looking back?
That's right.
It's done.
That's right.
Look at what you're working now. Don't look in the future. It's not here yet. Like James said, you may not even make it till tomorrow, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so by looking back, it's kind of insulting, that God is sitting here trying to work all these things for us. We keep looking back, going, man, those are the good old days, So there's some wonderful wisdom in just that as well. There's some advantages, of course, when we talk about wisdom. And, one of the first things is it guards us. Wisdom will protect us. I've always said, if you have knowledge, you should have the ability to make proper decisions because you have the right information. Now, wisdom is the ability to use it appropriately. Just because you have knowledge doesn't mean that you're wise. But wisdom, we're talking about having godly wisdom, and understanding that, like James said, if you lack it, do what? Beg for it? No. He said, just ask.
Just ask, that's right.
And he gives without what? Partiality. And so in that context, he's talking about as we're facing these trials and different difficult things that we're going through, and James just kind of throws it in there. He goes, look, kind of like if you're going through this and you need help, ask God for the wisdom. He didn't say ask him for a crystal ball so you can see it. He didn't say, let me get the weather for tomorrow, but more like, what do I need to wear tomorrow? What do I need? How do I make a proper decision? Have that wisdom. And so wisdom guards us. And then in verse 11, wisdom along with an inheritance is a good and an advantage to those who see the sun. There's something about somebody getting an inheritance and not having the intellect to be able to use it properly, right? They don't have the wisdom. And so wisdom can help in just that one aspect as well. So, we add wisdom to wealth, we know that we're going to use it properly. And so that's kind of the main point. And going in verse 12, it says, for wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. There's a lot of people that, they know, again, they have certain knowledge, but when they try to go out and do it, apply it, it fails. I do that when I work on vehicles all the time. I'll watch YouTube, got it. Walk out my garage, and all I had to do is just move that one little clip. No, I went and got a screwdriver and pried it off. I knew that I needed to take the connector apart, but I didn't. So I had the knowledge. So I watch these guys sometimes, man, and it's like they just say, oh, yeah, you just do that. And you watch them. If you watch them close, they have the wisdom because they know they've done it. They've taken their knowledge and applied it enough times. And to us, that's the issue. You may have this, and that's why it protects us and then why it's important for us. Wisdom as well, we understand as Christians, it gives us that divine perspective. This is one of the things where somebody may be able to just quote every verse in the Bible, but not really know how it applies, what the context it is. I hear that a lot. That's why, like when I talked about James asking for wisdom, I put it into context for you because it's easy. I could have just moved on, and some people go, "Oh, well, what about it?" And that's where a lot of people, they may know the words and the verses, but they don't have the wisdom, and then therefore they don't have a divine perspective. And these people that are like that don't have this divine perspective, to me, they end up like the Pharisees. It's just black and white. Well, that's what it says right there. Really? That's the only, you can just zip out 5 verses and say that's all there is to that topic? It's black and white. And I've heard people like, well, it's black and white. Well, you're right. You're right. I mean, if you read the Bible, it is. It's clear. We can understand it. But wisdom gives us the perspective to be able to understand the divine level of it and not just the superficiality of the context sometimes. And that's verses 13 and 14. Consider the work of God. For who is able to straighten what he has bent? In the day of prosperity, be happy. But in the day of adversity, consider. God has made one as well as the other, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. So stop seriously and think about what God's doing right now. Right now, stop. What is God doing? Doing something. Isn't it funny, though? Sometimes we can really just, when we want to, we can tell exactly what he's doing and why he's done something, and maybe he did it. But if you really think about it, we don't know the mind of God, and the only part that we do know is through his written word. And so, when we consider and stop and think about that, then it's kind of the idea that, God has arranged things in a way that you cannot change.
That's right.
If he bent it, you're not going to straighten it. Why'd he bend it? I don't know. It's bent. God did it. You know, sometimes it's like that, isn't it? It's like the kids, like your little kids, you know. You know, you explain something to them, they go, why? 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 Well, why do you do that? My grandsons are so inquisitive, and they do that. And I finally have to say, because. That's it. You know, it's like, and don't we do that to God sometimes? You know, it's like, well, why'd you bend it? Couldn't straight work? and so that's one of the things. And so, you know, you're not going to discover everything. And so whether it's in a day of prosperity or a day of adversity, and you're trying to figure things out and look at them, sometimes we give God credit where he had nothing to do with that. Or maybe he did, and you just don't get it. Like, I just keep thinking of Habakkuk. You know, the way Habakkuk cried out at God, said, hey, come punish these people. They're really evil. And then God gave him a plan. God told him to go, okay, I'm going to use the Assyrians. They're going to come and they're going to whoop the discipline on them. And then Habakkuk did what? Whoa, not the Assyrians. Don't bring them. They're the ones that need to be punished. Oh, Lord, don't do that. And then he did what? He went out and stood and waited for God to respond. That's guts, isn't it? You talk about, God, why is it bent? And what did God say? Hey, look, I know who they are. I'm paraphrasing, so I'm not quoting. I know who they are. And as soon as they become arrogant and they become blasphemous, they're going to go down too. See, he didn't have to say that. And a lot of times we want that. We're just like Habakkuk, where, you know, during these different events in our lives, we want to be explained like a little child. Hey, you got to tell me, or, you know, I won't. So wisdom, though, with his word, knowledge, gives us that divine perspective. And I talk about this as well in understanding the prophets. You want to know your Father? You need to look at the Old Testament. The Old Testament, God is having so many conversations through those prophets to people that it's just like a conversation he could be having with you and me.
That's right.
And like I've said, and I sound like a broken record because I keep saying it, maybe it's because these classes are overlapping, but it's just like I said, you know, there are certain things my dad specifically made a statement and told us. And that was like written law. And we knew those. And there was a whole lot of stuff because I lived with him, I grew up with him, you know, that he didn't have to tell me everything. I knew. Because why? I knew his spirit. I knew him. And so it gave me that perspective to where, you know, he didn't have to have everything written out. And that's that perspective of understanding and having that. And so wisdom, godly wisdom with his word is what helps us to be able to accomplish these things. So the one thing that we see wisdom teaches today is, first off, is ask God, seek God, you know. Seek God and ask him. And we have been promised that he would give us that wisdom. Now, you know, sometimes we may not fully understand it, but he has promised us to be able to give it. And I think the other thing is, always remember, he's powerful, he's in charge, he is sovereign, and everything that he wants done is going to happen. It doesn't matter who the president, what nation's ruling, how much technology you have, how much economy, great, less, it doesn't matter. So when we look around and we get all tore up over the news and all the world events and what's going on in Israel and the Middle East and South America, relax.
That's right.
Stop. Christians, stop.
That's right.
Our Father's in charge.
That's right.
Why do we get so ate up? And that's another place where we're not happy. Why? Because we're letting all the news things just take it out of us because we go, oh, no, that's going to cause a war. We're going to go to people and all that. There's nothing new under the sun. Didn't we start the book with that? And if we allow that, that's why seeking God and ask him. You know, when we look at wisdom in action, some of the things at work, we see how wisdom provides that balance I just said, kind of illustrating about the current events and how we can become so unbalanced and out of whack in verses 15 and 16. I've seen everything during my lifetime of futility. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. Do not be excessively righteous and do not be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? It sounds like, no, wait a minute. You want to be overly righteous, don't you? Well, what did that get the Pharisees? Everybody said they were overly righteous. And like I've said, I've defended them in their origin, where they came from historically. They were extremely sincere and devoted to making sure that the people didn't go back and get punished the way they did in Babylon. And so they became extremely righteous. And what did they lose in the process? They lost balance. They lost balance. They lost perspective. They lost wisdom as well. And so life looks unfair. We look at these situations where there are people who are very good people, very beautiful people, and they just die. And we see people that have contributed to society or to churches just taken in their prime. And then we look at that old rotten person that just keeps coming to church and they're no good for nothing. That's what we're saying, Or we see that person in your neighborhood. And we do that. We do. We see people and we kind of go, wow, man, that's kind of terrible. That person was such a valuable part of a family, a community, or a church. They were beautiful, loving, tender, gave of themselves, and their life's gone. And then we look at that person like Charles Manson, who just seems to not die. That guy lived to, I don't know how long, into his 80s. And you're like, how do they keep doing that? What did that do when we start thinking like that? To me, it's similar to that questioning something that's bent, that God has bent, looking at life and trying to apply our logic into where God's strategy overall. There's a lot of perspective there. And again, if we're looking just on this earth, and that's our limitation, then it is chaos. It's like what he said earlier about how the wise man can go mad by seeing these things. And that's a life, again, that doesn't have God in it. 17 and 18 continue. Do not be excessively wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp one thing and also not let go of the other. For the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. So it's again, looking at the idea of both of them, and truly the person who avoids sin because of fear of God that is trying to live that life. So you can't swing to either extreme, self-righteousness or completely open to sin. But that fear of God is what helps keep us in that middle ground. It gives us strength. This wisdom that we get from God gives us that ability to overcome the things that we see around. Verses 19 and 20. I have seen everything during my lifetime. Futility, the same verses, righteousness and this idea of those who are prolonging their lives that are wicked, and that balance again. And then, 21, 22, do not take seriously all the words which are spoken, so that you will not hear your servant cursing you. For you also have realized that you likewise have many times cursed others. I think it's simply the thing that, be careful of what you're doing because you've probably done it. When we talk about somebody.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you hear somebody talking about you, and boy, you get all bent out of shape. I cannot believe they're saying that about me. And you need to slow down, slow your roll, and think about, you telling me you've never done that?
That's right. That's right.
What is that? It's humble. It's humility, isn't it? It also helps you to understand what that person is going through. And it also keeps the ability to have a relationship there. And if you're going to try to help that person overcome, one, you realize I'm no better than that other person. I've done the same thing. And so we don't take it as personal, and we don't allow it to destroy what shred of a relationship we may be able to continue to build and improve and maybe help each other overcome the same type of problems as well. And so it gives us the strength to handle sin. Some of the obvious things. It helps us avoid entrapment. And it helps us deal with criticism. When people say things about us, you have to take it. Whether it's real, perceived, or not. If you criticize me, then I have to be able to understand it. Maybe it's true. I don't believe it is, but right? You never do. Your first reaction is defensive. You're like, whoa, what? And then you slow down and you think, wow, there's a point there. But the proud won't do that. The proud will just continue to hold fast to whatever they have said and believe in that, and they won't accept criticism. That's a sad state. I've seen that in people where, those who can take criticism, whether it's right or wrong, and how they handle the person who's criticizing them with respect, it's much more powerful and empowering than somebody who just fights back at anything that somebody might say that's not positive towards them. And that's miserable. It is so miserable to be that person if you're like that. I'm so sorry if you're like that. It's horrible.
That's right.
So wisdom provides us balance, strength, and it gives us this insight that we need. Understanding, only comes from God. This is one of the things. That true understanding that we have to focus on is not through the philosophies of men and different things. And in verses 23 and 24, I tested all this with wisdom. So all the things he's been doing, he's looked back at it and he says, and I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. What has been remote and exceedingly mysterious, who can discover it? So you can test things, but there reaches a point where you, yourself, your capabilities are always going to come short, but God won't. God will be able to provide that for you. Many things in life are that way. And God's plans are beyond our human reach or understanding at times, right? So even the wisest person sometimes can't explain everything. And that's kind of funny, too, when you look at experts, like on different documentaries and things like this, and they just, they're so confident. So confident. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you hear them on there. Everything they said in an interview 2 years earlier is now different. But they're so confident in the new one now, the new thought, the new theory, it's kind of interesting. I love experts, because there's a bunch of them that are very humble. Dr. Stephen Myers, I don't know if you're aware of him. He is an amazing man. Very humble. When he speaks, he's very respectful to people who, go against him. He's the one who wrote the book, The Signature in the Cell, and The Origin of Life, and things like this. And some of the people that when they attack him and the way he handles it, I hope I can be that way. Because his mind is fantastic, and he can handle the people. And watching the way they respond are the fools. They're the ones who believe they can have everything. And they can understand everything. It also, one of the things that we talk about and he ties back to is one of these desires that we think are so satisfying, and it's the most destructive, is looking at that somehow that sexual adventure is going to be something that is so satisfying. And we have a generation right now I thought the 60s were bad. Now, I was like a 10-year-old during that, but man, the things I heard and kind of saw that was going on when it comes to, liberation of morals and sexuality and things like that, boy, they just a millionfold in our society today. It's not satisfying. And they're finding that out. They're finding it out, that it's more destructive, trying to do this. And so in 25 and 26, and we know Solomon, how many wives did he have?
Too many.
2? No.
Too many.
That's too many. 2. And concubines? So this is Solomon. I directed my mind to know, to investigate, and to seek wisdom and an explanation, and to know the evil of folly and the foolishness of madness. And I discovered more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are chains, one who is pleasing to God will escape from her, but the sinner will be captured by her. We're talking about a prostitute or somebody who is using their sexuality, and that's what he's kind of describing, is how enticing, and men, we're attracted that way. We seem to have that one flaw that seems to be that, and it gets exploited by some women who understand that, and that's what Solomon is kind of expressing here. That how the seductiveness of this immoral woman traps men. Proverbs 5 through 7 talks about that as well, this type of capturing. In 27-28, behold, I have discovered this, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation. which I am still seeking, but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but I have not found a woman among all these. It sounds, again, very, there's some people going, yep, see there? I knew it. Look at the Bible. Let's keep it into the context. He's talking about the type of women that he's dealt with and what he has seen from his perspective, and a lot of those have been that, just looking throughout his life. The problem, the insights we see from wisdom is the problem is from within. It's in our heart, and that's what Jesus taught, right? Where does everything start? Murder didn't start just with an outward action. It started with the hate in the heart. All of these things. And so verse 29, behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many devices. God made us right. He didn't, create us that way. So as we wrap it up, we look at true wisdom. It's balance, strength, and insight, the things that we can gain as we look at it. And there's some beautiful ways we looked at it. So before we wrap up, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Our most amazing Father, wisdom is something that we do want, we desire it, we hope that we're asking the right questions. We hope that we're seeking your wisdom and not the one of the world. And we hope that your word is the knowledge in which we're trying to become wise with. Help us, Father, to go from here and to be able to take this knowledge and make ourselves wiser as we interact with others, and that we could learn to have that same wisdom we see through the love of your Son as he interacted on this earth during his ministry. And we ask all this in Christ's name, amen. So Sunday morning, 9:45 for Bible study, and then 10:45 for worship, and then 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So until then, God bless.